The coin lands wrong. That is the thing Declan Marsh notices first, before the crowd noise, before the flags snapping overhead, before any of it makes sense. He is standing 40 feet away on the courthouse steps, watching a street fair unscramble itself along the main block of Harlan, Kentucky, and an old man in a canvas work coat has just dropped something into the tin collection box, bolted to a folding card table, beside a German shepherd in a red service vest. The coin makes a hollow, single sound, the kind a quarter makes when it is the only thing in the container. The old man's hand is still extended over the slot. He does not pull it back right away. He stands looking at his own empty palm the way a person looks at a thing they have given up for good, and then he folds his fingers slowly, tucks his fist against his chest, and turns to walk away from the table. And Declan Marsh, 39 years old, 14 years in the Marine Corps and 6 months out of it, watches him go. He does not know why he follows. He will think about that later, in the particular way he has of reviewing his own decisions from a cold operational remove, and he will not find a clean answer. The man is not in danger. Nobody is shouting. It is a Saturday in early October, and the mountains above Harlan are going amber and rust, and there is a smell of wood smoke and kettle corn drifting through the fair, and there is no threat anywhere that Declan can name. The coin had made a hollow sound, and the old man's hand stayed open too long, and Declan is already moving before the thought has finished forming. He follows at a distance, 20 feet back, then 30 when the crowd thins and distance matters less. If this story lands somewhere in your chest, hit subscribe before you look away. A lot of these find people who needed them, and there are more coming. The old man's name, Declan will learn, is Norbert Kane. He is 73 years old, 5'9", once wide through the shoulders but now narrowed by time, with white hair cropped short beneath a John Deere cap that has seen more years than any hat should. His work coat is canvas duck, brown, with a collar worn pale at the edges. He walks with a slight forward lean. Not a limp exactly, but a kind of deliberate lean to every step, as though the world offers light resistance. His face, when Declan finally sees it full on, is deeply lined across the forehead, and at the corners of his eyes, with a mouth that sits level and quiet, not grim, but accustomed to not saying things. His hands, which Declan noticed before his face, are the hands of a man who poured 40 years of himself into physical work. Knuckle-proud, thick-fingered, the right one carrying a scar along the heel of the palm from some old tool or old wire. Norbert Kane walks 3 blocks east on Main, turns right on a street called Cedar, without looking back, and stops in front of a white aluminum-sided house with a concrete porch and a front yard more brown than green. The gutters are bent at the corners. The storm door is missing its glass panel, and somebody has taped a piece of cardboard in its place. There is a wheelchair ramp of raw, unpainted plywood leading up to the front door that looks like it was built by someone who knew what they were doing but did not have the materials they deserved. He is reaching for his keys when Declan calls out, "Sir." Norbert stops. He turns and he looks at Declan with the eyes of a man who has had enough surprises for 1 decade. "You came from the fair," he said. It was not a question. "I did." "You're following me?" "Yes, sir." Norbert studied him for a moment. His face did not change much, but something in it settled, like a man deciding whether to be afraid and concluding he cannot afford to be. "You with the county?" he said. The question was specific enough to register. Not with the police, not with a newspaper, with the county. "No, sir," Declan said. "Marine Corps. Former now. I'm just passing through." Norbert looked at him for another few seconds. Then he looked past him, down the street, in the automatic way of someone who has learned to check their surroundings. The street was empty and quiet. "You want to come inside?" Norbert said. It was still not quite a question. "If you'll have me." The inside of the house was clean in the way that clean costs effort rather than money. The carpet was old but vacuumed. The kitchen smelled of coffee and something with onions cooked earlier that day. There were framed photographs on the wall going back several decades. A younger Norbert beside a woman who had his same quality of stillness, and children at various ages, and a farmhouse that no longer appeared in any of the more recent frames. In the back bedroom, through a door left open, a hospital bed sat beside a window. In it was the woman from the photographs, older now and smaller, her white hair spread thin against a pillow. "My wife, Darlene," Norbert said quietly. "She had a stroke 14 months ago. Left side." Declan stood in the kitchen doorway. He did not say he was sorry. People said that too easily, and Norbert did not look like a man who wanted the easy version of anything. "She knows what's happening," Norbert said. "She understands everything. She just can't talk back the way she used to." He paused. "She'd probably tell you to sit down." Declan sat. The coffee Norbert poured was strong. He sat across the kitchen table and looked at his own mug for a moment before he looked at Declan. "The collection tin," Norbert said. "You saw that." "I saw." Norbert nodded slowly. "Jarvis's dog. Good dog. They do good work." He paused again. "I used to give more. I used to give a lot more of a lot of things." He turned his mug a quarter turn on the table. "We sold the farm 4 years ago. My daughter and her husband got caught in something I didn't understand at the time. Loan situation. They needed help." He stopped. His mouth closed. Whatever he had been about to say, he decided against it. "I keep meaning to understand it better. I still don't fully." Declan waited. "There's a company," Norbert said, "called Meridian Asset Solutions. They bought our farm debt when my daughter's original lender sold the note. That happens, I know. Notes get sold. But Meridian, they have a way of doing things." He set his mug down and placed both hands flat on the table. "Darlene's care costs what it costs. The home health aide comes 3 mornings a week, and I do the rest. We had money saved. Enough, we thought." He looked at the window. "Meridian found a lien we didn't know about from a contractor my son-in-law used on a barn repair 9 years ago. Contractor went out of business. The lien never got released properly. Meridian bought it from the estate. They used it to put a secondary claim on the proceeds from the farm sale." Declan set his mug down. "How much?" he asked. $18,000, Norbert said. "Which we paid, because the attorney we could afford said we didn't have a choice, and fighting it would cost more." He was quiet for a moment. "That was the savings, most of it. Then 6 months ago, they came back with a service fee schedule that was in the original note. Something about loan administration costs. $1,700. Declan looked at him. "It's in the original note," Norbert said. "Or they say it is. I have a copy. I've read it 40 times. I can't find what they're pointing to." "Do you still have the note?" "I have everything," Norbert said. "Every piece of paper going back 9 years." That was the moment Declan decided he was not passing through Harlan after all. He left that evening, and he came back in the morning, which was Sunday, and he came back again on Monday with a yellow legal pad and a request to see the papers. Norbert laid them out on the kitchen table in date order and went to sit with Darlene while Declan read. He read for 3 hours. He made notes in a handwriting that was small and angular and military precise. He identified 4 things he did not understand and wrote them in a separate column with question marks. The papers were in better order than most people kept them. Norbert had a green accordion folder for the farm documents and a separate manila envelope for everything that had come from Meridian. The farm documents went back 9 years and included the original mortgage, 2 refinances, a crop insurance policy, and the records from the sale itself, which had involved 3 parties and 2 attorneys and a closing that had taken 4 months longer than it should have. The Meridian documents were newer and cleaner, the way documents from a company like that always were. Sharp corners on the paper, a letterhead with an address in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a website printed at the bottom. Declan read the original note twice. Then he read the addendum pages, of which there were 11. Then he read the Meridian acquisition notice, which referenced the original note and the addendum and a fee schedule that it described as being attached. The fee schedule was not attached. That was the first thing he wrote in his question column. The second thing was that the lien from the contractor, a man named Bert Hopper, who had built a new hay barn in 2014, was referenced in Meridian's collection letter as an active encumbrance. Declan was not a lawyer and did not pretend to understand all the ways a lien could be active or inactive. He wrote it down and drew a question mark beside it. The third thing was that the dollar amounts did not match between the original note's fee language, which was vague but present, and the specific figure Meridian was now claiming. There was a multiplier somewhere that nobody had explained. The fourth thing was smaller and harder to name. It was the way the letters from Meridian were structured. The first collection letter was dated 18 months after the farm sale. The second, the one with the service fee, was dated 4 months after Norbert had paid the first collection. The timing felt deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how long to wait before returning, and what state a person would be in when they did. He had rented a room at a motel on the state route side of town. It was the kind of room that discouraged lingering. Thin curtains, a wall heater that ticked, a bed with a bolster pillow that smelled of artificial lavender. He did not mind it. He had slept in worse, considerably worse, and the room had a desk and a lamp and enough quiet to think. He had been in Harlan 3 days before he started recognizing faces. The woman at the gas station, who had worked the morning shift every day since at least the 90s, given the vintage of her uniform jacket. The retired man who walked the same loop around the park at 7:15 with a shepherd mix that had one ear up and one ear folded, and who always paused at the same bench to look at the mountains before continuing. The teenager who swept the sidewalk in front of the hardware store each morning, not because anyone appeared to be watching, but because that was clearly what was done here, and had been done for a long time. Declan had a habit, developed over 14 years of being dropped into unfamiliar places, of reading a town quickly. Not its landmarks or its history, but its rhythm. The times things opened and closed. The faces that were at ease and the faces that were not. The weight of a place, which you could feel in the way people moved through it, whether they owned the ground under their feet or were just borrowing it. Harlan had been a mining town and was not one now, and that history sat in it, the way old weight sits in old wood, not as rot but as grain. The storefronts on Main were a mix of occupied and not, but the occupied ones were genuinely occupied, not curated, not preserved, just used. A hardware store that sold the things people actually needed. A diner with a handwritten daily special on a chalkboard. A county services building whose parking lot was always half full by 8 in the morning. A beauty parlor with 3 chairs and a television tuned to local news. It was not a town that had given up. It was a town that had kept going with what it had, and what it had was stubbornness and a long memory, and the kind of neighbor who showed up without being asked. The dog's name was Sable. She was a German shepherd, working line, roughly 7 years old, with a coat that ran from deep mahogany at the shoulders to near black along the spine and muzzle, with pale tan feet that gave her a formal look at odds with how she actually moved, which was alert and economical and deeply attentive to everything in her immediate radius. She had a white blaze on her sternum, narrow and distinct, and her ears were fully upright and mobile, tracking sound the way a radar dish tracks a signal. She wore a plain olive-green collar with a brass tag. She was not Declan's dog, technically. She was assigned to the Harlan County Veterans Outreach Table at the fair, working as a facility comfort dog, and after the fair packed up on Sunday evening, her handler, a veteran named Lloyd Soto, brought her to the motel parking lot and handed her leash to Declan, with a look that suggested the handoff had been inevitable. "She likes you better anyway," Lloyd said. Lloyd Soto was 58 years old, lean and permanently weathered, with a face that had the particular texture of someone who had spent a lot of time outdoors in Kentucky in winter without proper gear. He was missing the two smallest fingers on his left hand from a demolitions accident in the early 90s, and he wore that hand without self-consciousness, the way you wear something you have made your peace with. He ran the Veterans Outreach Table out of his own truck most Saturdays, and he knew Harlan the way a man knows a place he is committed to staying in. "Tell me what you know about Meridian Asset Solutions," Declan said. Lloyd turned a paper cup of coffee in his abbreviated left hand. They were standing in the motel parking lot. Sable sat between them, ears up. "I know they've been through here before," Lloyd said. "Different name, maybe, same people. There's a man named Gary Fenwick who fronts for them locally. He drives a gray Land Rover, and he wears shoes that cost more than my truck payment." He paused. "3 families I know of. The K9's are the latest. Before them, there was a widow on Route 9 who lost money on an old mortgage buyout. She didn't understand. And before her, there was an older couple who lost their timber rights." He looked at the mountains above the town, going dark in the October evening. "They find liens, or they find debts that got muddled. They buy them legal, and they work the people who can't afford to fight." "There a pattern to the service fee?" Declan asked. "Yes," Lloyd said. "It comes in after the first hit, after you've paid what they say you owe. You think it's done. Then there's a new letter, different division, different letterhead, same parent company if you look." Declan looked at Sable. Sable looked at the parking lot entrance. "She does that," Lloyd said. "Whenever somebody pulls in she doesn't like." A gray Land Rover had not pulled in. The lot was empty. He filed it anyway. The woman who helped him find what he needed was named Patricia Sewell. She was 60 years old, the size of a woman who had been larger and had decided at some point that the world owed her an explanation for that. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she worked as a paralegal at a legal aid office on the 3rd floor of a building on West Center Street, whose elevator had been broken since August, and whose stairs she took 2 at a time without complaint. She had grown up in Harlan County, and she had never left because she had decided at some other point that leaving was a form of losing. She found the language in 4 hours. "It's in the addendum," she said, sliding a photocopy across her desk. Her office smelled of paper and old carpet, and the particular staleness of fluorescent lighting. Not the note itself. An addendum, page 11. And the addendum references a fee schedule from the original loan servicer, who was bought out, whose fee schedule was superseded when Meridian acquired the note. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "What they are charging does not exist in the surviving documentation chain. The fee schedule they're using hasn't been in effect since the original servicer was dissolved." "Meaning?" Meaning they invented $1,700, she said. Or they're counting on Norbert not having the addendum to the original servicer's dissolution filing. She paused. Which most people wouldn't. He has it, Declan said. He has everything. Patricia Sewell looked at him the way a person looks at good news they have not received in a while. All right, she said. There was more than the $1,700, it turned out. There was the original lien from the contractor, which Patricia determined had, in fact, been properly discharged by the contractor's estate administrator before Meridian purchased it. The documentation of that discharge had been filed with the county clerk, but had not been attached to the chain of title in the way that would have made it visible at the time of the farm sale. It had simply been missed by the closing attorney in the pressure of a complicated sale with multiple parties. $18,000 paid on a lien that no longer legally existed. That was what the hollow coin had been protecting. Declan drove back to the Kane house on Wednesday evening. He sat at the kitchen table with Norbert and laid it out in plain language, the addendum, the dissolved fee schedule, the discharge filing that predated Meridian's acquisition of the lien. Norbert listened with his hands flat on the table and his face very still. Sable was on the floor beside Declan's chair, with her chin on her forepaws, breathing slow. Norbert said nothing for a long moment after Declan finished. Then he said, "The 18,000. Yes, Declan said. That's real? Patricia thinks it is. She wants to show it to a consumer protection attorney she knows in Lexington." Norbert was quiet again. In the back room, a monitor beeped once, softly, and then was quiet. "Darlene's been worried," he said finally. "She can't say it, but I know when she's worried. She watches the door different." He paused. "I've been telling her it was going to be fine. I didn't know if that was true." "It may still take time," Declan said. "Meridian will push back. They have a legal team." "But it's real," Norbert said. "What you found. It's real." "It's real." Norbert looked at him for a long moment. His level mouth moved once, tightened, then settled. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "You don't know us." Declan thought about the coin in the open palm and decided not to say it. "You reminded me of my grandfather," he said instead. "He had hands like yours." It was true and not the whole truth, and Norbert seemed to understand both parts of that. The attorney in Lexington was named Marcus Webb, and he drove down on a Thursday morning in a 12-year-old Subaru that had a law school parking pass still stuck to the rear window and a back seat that appeared to be primarily a filing system. He was 44 years old, a compact man with close-cropped black hair going silver at the sideburns, and the efficient, unhurried manner of someone who had fought a lot of fights and won enough of them to keep going. He shook Norbert's hand with both of his, which Norbert noticed, and he set his briefcase on the kitchen table and opened it with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned that the way you handle papers tells people how seriously you take what the papers say. He spent 40 minutes with the documents before he said anything. Norbert made coffee and brought it, and Marcus nodded without looking up, which was the right response. When he said something, it was a single phrase. "This is a pattern case." Marcus spread 3 pages on the kitchen table that Norbert had not seen before. They were records from a consumer protection filing in Bell County, 1 county south, and in Pike County to the north, each involving a similar structure. A purchased debt, a disputed lien of questionable provenance, an initial collection, a secondary fee schedule from a dissolved servicer, elderly homeowners who paid because they could not afford not to. "Meridian does this," Marcus said. "Not just here. We've been building a profile on them for 2 years. We've been waiting for a case where the documentation trail is clean enough to go after the original collection, not just the secondary fees. He looked at the discharge filing in Norbert's folder. This is the cleanest I've seen. Lloyd called 4 people that same Thursday. One of them called 2 more. By Friday morning, a woman named Roberta Hazard, who had lost $8,000 in a Meridian fee collection 3 years prior in Bell County, had agreed to be a second complainant. By Friday afternoon, the Bell County case file that had been sitting unresolved in a regional Consumer Affairs office was reopened and transferred to the State Attorney General's office on the basis of a joint filing Marcus Webb submitted at 4:45. What happened in the middle of all that, between Lloyd's calls and Marcus's filing, was less visible but harder to move. Roberta Hazard drove 2 hours from Pineville to sit at Patricia's office and go over her own documents. She was 67 years old, a former school librarian with the organized patience of someone who had spent 30 years helping people find things, and she had kept her Meridian papers in a binder with labeled dividers. Her story was different from Norbert's in the specifics and identical in the shape. A purchase debt, a cleanup collection. Then a second letter with a service fee. 18 months later, after she had sold her mother's property, to pay the first. She had paid that fee, too, because her attorney at the time had told her what Norbert's attorney had told him. "I knew it didn't feel right," she told Patricia. "I just didn't know what right looked like." Patricia showed her what the addendum pages said, and what they did not say, and Roberta sat quietly for a moment, and then she said she would be happy to put her name on whatever needed her name. There were also people who came without being asked. A man named Vernon Grady, who had worked with Norbert at the Harlan County Road Department for 16 years, came by the house on Friday evening with a casserole his wife had made, and an offer to sit with Darlene any morning that Norbert needed to be somewhere. A woman from Darlene's church, who had known her since before her children were born, came by on Saturday with a small flowering plant, and spent an hour talking to Darlene about people they knew in common, which Darlene could follow entirely and clearly did, going by the way her right hand moved and the steadiness in her face. Lloyd himself came by on Sunday and sat at the kitchen table with Norbert and did not say much of anything, which was what Norbert needed more than conversation. None of it was dramatic. None of it would appear in any filing or any record. It was just the thing a community did when it recognized one of its own in trouble, and it was the thing that held Norbert steady through the 5 days between Thursday and the following Tuesday, when Marcus's phone rang. Gary Fenwick's gray Land Rover was photographed in the Harlan County Courthouse parking lot on Friday at noon, which Declan noted because he was sitting in his own truck across the street. Fenwick was 47, pink-faced and precise, wearing a dark coat and carrying a leather portfolio that he clutched in both hands against his chest as he walked. He did not look at Declan's truck. He went inside and came out 11 minutes later with a look that was controlled, but not quite as controlled as he had intended, and he drove north. Sable, in the passenger seat, watched him go. "Yeah," Declan said. She had known the moment Fenwick walked out of the courthouse. Her head had come up from the seat, and her ears had gone forward, and her body had gone still in the particular way that was not aggression, but was attention at its finest pitch, the full deployment of everything she had been built to be. She did not growl. She simply saw him and became very quiet, and that was enough. The AG filing triggered a formal inquiry. The inquiry triggered a document preservation order. Meridian's attorneys sent a response within 72 hours, as Marcus had predicted, asserting the validity of all collections. Marcus had also predicted that. What he had not predicted but welcomed was that the Bell County complainant connected a third family through her church, and the third family had a letter from Meridian referencing a fee schedule that predated not just the servicer dissolution, but the original note itself, which was not an oversight but a fabrication, and which Marcus submitted to the inquiry as a supplemental exhibit on the following Tuesday. Through all of it, Norbert went to the grocery store and made soup and changed Darlene's medication schedule and vacuumed the carpet on Tuesdays and did not say much. Declan drove by most evenings and sometimes came in for coffee and sometimes just slowed down to see the lights on, which they always were. Sable rode with him. She had stopped being Lloyd's dog, and Lloyd had stopped pretending to be bothered by that. "She knows what she's doing," Lloyd said. One of the evenings Declan came in, Darlene was awake in her hospital bed, propped up on pillows with a lapboard across her knees and a notepad on the board. Her left hand did not work well enough to write, so she wrote slowly and with concentration with her right. When Declan came to the doorway, she turned the notepad so he could read it. 2 words written in careful right-handed letters. "Thank you." He stood in the doorway, and he did not say "You're welcome," because the moment was too specific for a general phrase, and instead he said, "Yes, ma'am," and nodded once, and she held his eyes for a moment, and then she turned the notepad back and wrote something else and held it up again. She had written a second word, "Stay." It took him a moment to understand she did not mean stay in the room. He went to find Norbert in the kitchen, and he stood there for a minute with his hand on the back of a chair. "She knows what she means," Norbert said without looking up from the pot on the stove. "I know," Declan said. "This place is not what it was," Norbert said, "but it's still something." He stirred the pot. "Lloyd was telling me there are a lot of veterans moving through this part of the state. Not enough for them, I don't think. Not enough that's steady." He paused. "I don't know what you did before. In the Corps." "Logistics," Declan said, "and some other things." "Lloyd runs that outreach on a shoestring," Norbert said. "He said he's been trying to get someone to write grants for 2 years. Someone who understands the system." Declan stood at the table and looked at the pot on the stove and thought about the motel room with the ticking wall heater and the artificial lavender and the fact that everything he owned fit in the back of his truck. "I don't know anything about writing grants," he said. "No," Norbert agreed, "but you know how to find out." The formal outcome of the Attorney General's inquiry took 4 months. During that time, Declan wrote 2 grant applications with Patricia's guidance, one of which was funded at $38,000 and one of which was rejected and which he revised and submitted again. He also fixed the aluminum siding on the east side of the Kane house where it had come loose at the lower panel, and he replaced the cardboard in the storm door with proper glass. And in February, he and Lloyd and a third veteran named Dennis Okafor built a proper wooden ramp with a railing to replace the bare plywood one. Dennis Okafor was 46 years old, compact and steady, with hands that moved on lumber the way experienced hands do, minimal motion and maximum placement. He had come back to Harlan after 12 years away and 3 tours in different places and a marriage that had lasted longer than most people expected before it did not. He drove a truck that needed a new exhaust manifold, and he had not fixed it yet. And the sound of it arriving at the Kane house on the first Saturday in February was the sound of something running on its own terms, regardless of what it cost. The 3 of them worked in cold that made the wood stiff at the joints and the screws slow to set. Sable stayed on the porch and watched with the patient attention of a supervisor who has nothing to add but wants to account for everything. Norbert brought coffee out at 10 in the morning without being asked, and he stood for a moment watching them work. And something in his face when he looked at the ramp, at the level surface and the solid railing, was the particular expression of a man who had been carrying a thing for a long time and was watching it be set down by other people's hands. He went back inside without saying anything. That was fine. It did not need to be said. Norbert handed Declan coffee the morning they finished the ramp and watched him from the porch, with the cup going warm in his hands. "You'll catch a cold working in February," he said. "I don't catch colds," Declan said. It was almost entirely untrue, but it had been his grandfather's line, and it felt right in the context. Norbert smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that does not need an audience to be real. The AG inquiry concluded in March with a consent agreement and a repayment order. Meridian Asset Solutions agreed, without admitting wrongdoing, to return all collected amounts to the Kane family and Roberta's family, totaling just over $26,000. Gary was not named individually in the agreement. Marcus told Declan that this was how it usually went with institutional actors. The company bent, the individual walked, and the system ground on. He said it without bitterness, which suggested he had made his peace with it some time ago. "Is it enough?" Declan asked. "For the K9's?" "Yes," Marcus said. "For the system? Ask me again in 10 years. It was enough for the K9's. Norbert deposited the repayment check without ceremony, paid for 6 months of full-time home health aid coverage, and bought Darlene a proper adjustable hospital bed with a motorized head and a better mattress, which made her cry in a quiet way that was not grief but relief. So long delayed it had lost the ability to arrive quietly. Declan was in the kitchen when that happened. He heard it through the doorway. He stood at the window looking at the street and at the mountains beyond the street and at the pale early March sky, going from gray to something close to blue, and Sable pushed her head against his thigh, and he put his hand on her neck. In April, Lloyd's second grant application came through, the one Declan had rewritten. $52,000 over 2 years, enough to pay a coordinator. Lloyd offered the position to Declan over coffee at a diner on Main Street called the Cornerstone, which served a breakfast plate with biscuits the size of softballs and gravy that was made from scratch and was better than anything in the county and possibly better than anything Declan had ever eaten, and he had eaten in a lot of counties. "I'm not a coordinator," Declan said. "You're not a grant writer either," Lloyd said. "Look how that went." Declan looked at his coffee. "I move around," he said. Even as he said it, he heard how it sounded. He heard it the way you hear a habit you have had long enough to believe is a fact. Lloyd waited. "What does the coordinator actually do?" Declan said. "Right now? Whatever I need," Lloyd said. "Intake, case navigation, community connection, driving veterans to medical appointments, paperwork, making sure the phone gets answered." He paused. "And probably fixing things that are broken, which you appear to do anyway, regardless of whether anyone is paying you." Declan turned his cup. Outside the Cornerstone's window, a group of middle school kids in matching orange vests walked past on the sidewalk. 2 teachers at either end, all of them headed somewhere deliberate and a little loud. Sable, at Declan's boot, lifted her head and watched them pass, and when they were gone, she set her chin back on the floor. He thought about 14 years of moving. He thought about the places that had felt like something for a few weeks and then had stopped feeling like something, and how he had always told himself that was the nature of places and not a thing he was doing himself. He thought about a coin in a collection tin. He thought about a woman's right-handed handwriting on a notepad. 2 words, not a question. "Okay," he said. Lloyd did not make a production of it. He just poured more coffee and moved to the next thing on the list he kept in his shirt pocket, which was a long list and which had a line across the bottom for what came next. Declan came by the Kane house that evening with a bag of groceries because the standing arrangement was that he cooked on Wednesdays, and this was close enough to Wednesday. Norbert was at the kitchen table sorting papers. He looked up and then at the bag and then at the clock. "It's Thursday," Norbert said. "I know," Declan said. "I'll cook tomorrow, too." Norbert said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "There's a house 2 blocks over. The McCready house. Been empty since spring. Bank property now. They're looking to lease it, not sell it. Patricia knows the bank officer." Declan set the bag on the counter. "That's 2 blocks away," he said. "I know where it is," Norbert said. Declan looked at him. "Darlene mentioned it," Norbert said. "The house. She mentioned the specific house 2 blocks away. She wrote it down, yes." Declan stood with his hand on the grocery bag and looked at the old man at the kitchen table with his work-worn hands and his level mouth and his John Deere cap and the photographs on the wall behind him. All those people, all that continuity, all that lived time, and he thought about his truck in the street outside and everything he owned in the back of it, and about the difference between moving through a place and being in one. "I'd need to bring the dog," he said. Norbert looked at Sable, who was already in the corner of the kitchen, already settled, already occupying the space as though she had been doing it for years. "She's already moved in," Norbert said. There was a moment then that asked nothing of either of them, and they both stayed in it without hurrying it along. Outside, the evening was coming down over Harlan, over the mountains that ringed the town and turned dark first at the ridgeline, and then deepened all the way down to the streets. And in the kitchen, the lamp above the table was warm and the soup was going on the stove, and Sable's breathing was the steadiest sound in the room. Declan unpacked the groceries. There is something in the quiet gesture of a man putting food on a shelf that says more than most words can. Not the big moments, not the filings and the agreements and the check that finally came, but the small ones. The ramp built in February cold. The coffee poured without asking. The coin that had nothing else behind it, dropped anyway into a tin for a dog working in a red vest at a street fair, because that is what a man like Norbert does with the last quarter he has. You give what you have. You trust that something, somewhere, is watching. If this story found you today, I hope it found you at the right time. The people who give their last quarter into the collection box, the people who ask nothing for themselves and keep giving anyway, they deserve to have someone follow them home. They deserve to have someone stay. May God bless you and keep the people you love close. Watch for the ones who carry more than they show. Sometimes what looks like a small kindness is the beginning of something that changes everything.